I'm transforming the overworld into a frozen wasteland, covering it in snow and ice to add a new survival challenge. What if the terrain was made of packed ice instead of stone? What if wood wasn't renewable? What if there was no lava in the world at all? Find out as we create and explore the Frost Pale. The purpose of this project is to use a custom overworld to add a new kind of challenge to survival, and we're going to do this in a few ways. To start with, let's clear away most of these biomes so that we can start from a mostly clean slate. For now, I've made the entire overworld just an ocean biome, just to clear away most of the features. It does leave a few things, like a few sparse trees, and of course we have the seagrass and kelp where there's water. But overall, it should be just a little easier to see the small changes that we'll be starting with. My overarching goal is to force new playstyles. Different kinds of farms might become more necessary or useful, exploration may have a much greater emphasis, but all of this should be dictated by the way the world generates. For example, in the vanilla overworld, stone is obviously extremely plentiful. If we make it less common, this potentially makes cobblestone generators a lot more important. So I think step number 1 is going to be replacing the stone and deep slate in the overworld with packed ice and blue ice, respectively. And already I'd say this is doing a lot of heavy lifting to visually make this world look frozen over. Of course, I also went ahead and changed the biome from ocean to frozen ocean so we can have some peppered snow everywhere. And this has had a few side effects of adding giant icebergs all over the place. We'll be making some custom biomes later, so we won't have to worry about these for very long. This is just to get a rough idea of the broad visual that we're going for. Now we can also see that this has had some impact underground. Because there's no stone, there's currently nowhere for any of the ores to generate. Not just coal and iron, but things like granite, diorite, even dirt blobs and gravel blobs that generate underground are currently not generating. So that's something that we'll have to re-implement later. Another goal I have is to prioritize more uncommon block palettes. Oak, birch, and spruce are probably the most common wood types, not just in terms of generation, but also in terms of what people actually build with. So I think I'd like to make some other wood types more dominant in the world. Specifically, I think it'd be really cool if most of the world had pale oak trees, but they're going to be a little bit taller and have branches, kind of like the fancy oak trees that you would find normally. I also think bricks will look really great as a building block here, so we'll want to make sure that clay is pretty accessible. And ultimately, the main challenge of this data pack is going to come from extending the early and mid game. Now this itself actually represents 2 separate goals. I'll want to increase the player's reliance on early game tools and resources like wooden tools, and by extension make other progression milestones like stone tools and iron tools more impactful. These are mostly going to come in later as we change or add recipes and loot tables, but we should keep them in mind as the world gen starts to take shape. So with everything we've talked about planned out, let's get some basic biomes implemented. Yeah, I would say that this has already been just absolutely transformed. Exactly the same terrain as we were just in, but now fully turned into a frozen world. So, scattered throughout the surface, we have these small pale oak trees. Some of them are pretty tall, some of them have lots of branches, some of them don't have very many, but none of them have leaves. This is one of those changes that I think is going to make wood a lot more important in the early game. Eventually we'll add some trees with leaves, but they aren't going to be the most populous tree type. It's mostly going to be these empty ones, which means until you find trees that have leaves, you do not have renewable wood. You have to intentionally go out and get some. Now there is still plenty of it, just like there is plenty of stone here on the surface, but again, obviously dramatically less than normal because the underground is still already replaced with this packed ice and blue ice down below. We've got a bit of cobblestone mixed in as well, just to add some texture, but these piles of rocks are going to be pretty much your only source of stone, at least until you get a cobblestone generator. Now all of the snow here that's on top, as well as the ice that's in the rivers, is handled by a vanilla Minecraft feature that just adds a frozen layer to the top of the entire world if the temperature is low enough. However, we are adding some additional features. Primarily, there are small disks of powdered snow that are scattered about everywhere. You can tell them apart, thankfully, because the snow layers do not land on top of them. But you'll need to be aware of these and potentially get some leather armor soon to be able to survive safely and explore safely here in the frozen world. Now to help with this, certain mobs like wolves will have a chance to drop at least one leather. Polar bears will drop multiple, and foxes also have a chance to drop some, but a smaller chance than wolves. And this is going to be necessary because throughout most of this biome at least, there aren't going to be a lot of passive mobs. Pigs, cows, chickens, sheep, none of them are going to spawn here. So instead you'll have to gather those resources from other mobs. Like I said, wolves and foxes are going to drop leather, and goats now drop mutton and wool. But you can't shear the goats, so you will have to kill them for the wool, and therefore don't have quite as easily a renewable of resource. Again, just adding to that additional challenge. Of course, if you need a more consistent resource, there are plenty of sweet berry bushes around, but these present their own challenges. They aren't super efficient for food, and of course, they have a chance to hurt you if you get too close. Now, currently the oceans are filled with basically just a carbon copy of the normal frozen oceans, which I do think is mostly where we want to be. These are already pretty spot on to the kind of vibe that we want for this frozen overworld. We've got polar bears, we've got icebergs, we've got plenty of snow and ice. I did go ahead and add kelp and seagrass underneath, even though that is not typical of the vanilla frozen oceans, because I do think it adds an important aesthetic aspect to the seafloor. And I might be playing my cards just a little bit early, but I've also gone ahead and added this variant ocean biome, which I'm calling the Silent Ocean. As you can see down here, it is an ocean, the seafloor of which is infected by skulk, just like the deep dark. We've got skulk catalysts, skulk sensors, and of course skulk shriekers, and importantly, these skulk shriekers are able to spawn wardens. Except obviously, since it is all waterlogged, they're all completely silent. They're able to hear things still, but they can't actually react, and so even the skulk shriekers can't spawn wardens. This is mostly here just because I thought it was cool. Obviously, it doesn't present any kind of challenge, but an additional goal that I have for this project is even though we are pretty dramatically changing the overworld, I want to make sure that most naturally appearing blocks are still obtainable. I needed to put the skulk somewhere, but I didn't want to just completely copy the deep dark in terms of how it actually presents gameplay-wise. So this does something that I think is cool and interesting, doesn't necessarily need to be challenging, as long as the blocks are available. This is also where Deep Slate is going to be accessible. It's going to have a chance to spawn on top of these icebergs. Technically as well on the seafloor, although from my flying around, it doesn't seem like that's very common. So mostly on top of these icebergs. Again, going to be a resource that is pretty uncommon and won't be renewable in the same way that it is in the vanilla overworld. Now, before we add some more biomes, I want to do something with the terrain here. Terrain is definitely the hardest part of worldgen, and it's where I have the least experience, but I do want to get a little bit more practice in, and I have been practicing a lot lately. Ideally, I would like at least more jagged mountains, and preferably a lot taller as well. I think I have a pretty good idea of how to do that, and then if I can, I'd like the rivers and oceans to be just a little bit more shallow. We do still want them to generate because I think they add an important navigational aspect to the world, so let's see what we can accomplish here. So we've certainly changed the terrain. We're at the exact same coordinates, but obviously it looks dramatically different. So we're going to need to fly around and see if the changes that we actually attempted have taken hold. Flying over here, this is obviously a sort of small lake and indeed has a bit of a river flowing off this way. Because I haven't made a custom river biome, this is still the frozen river biome, and so we have these kind of weird beaches as well where it's landing. That's something we'll be able to fix once we actually do something of our own here, but it is clearly much more shallow throughout the entire thing. This also seems to have made them a little thinner, but I think that's actually really, really great. It just adds a little bit more distance between my overworld and the vanilla overworld. Oh good, we've got an ocean over here as well, so we can see. It's a little bit hard to tell if it is much more shallow. Clearly we still have some deep parts over here, which isn't itself a problem, but I would like most of the ocean to be more shallow like this, and it does seem to be quite probably the case. Again, looks like we dipped down a little bit down here, but I think that's probably fine. Yeah, I'm liking how that's looking. Let's head back to land and see if we can find some nice mountains. Ideally, they are more common and also more jagged, taller, etc. Ooh, okay, yes, wow. We got some nice cliffs carving through this river, or rather the river carving through these nice cliffs. We get into some pretty good foothills and then some nice tall mountains. Not quite as jagged as I would like, but they are getting a little bit closer to the clouds. Let's see if we can find anything better. Oh yeah, didn't take too long to find this monster. Oh boy, this is exactly what we wanted to see. Very much so like amplified terrain, but restricted to this region. Obviously, it's much more normal over here, which makes the mountain even that much more impressive compared to its surroundings. Once we add actual mountain biomes, this should look even better, because right now I feel like the dirt is taking away from the huge cliffs of packed ice. But I'm not entirely sure what all I want to do with the mountain yet, so before we dive into that, let's talk a little bit about some of the other progression changes that I have planned, and then we can make some biomes that incorporate that. So I mentioned before that because most of the leaves in the frost pale are not going to have leaves, it's going to make finding trees that have leaves much more important so that you have that renewable wood source. But I want to accentuate that even more by making renewable wood more of a mid-game milestone. And so when we do add trees that have leaves, I'm going to make it so that leaves of any kind do not drop saplings. Instead, you'll have to craft them by having 4 leaves. So 4 pale oak leaves gives you 1 pale oak sapling, and we'll do that for every tree type. That means players will have to have iron for shears before they can start getting renewable wood. Now, to accommodate this, iron is going to need to be relatively plentiful because shears don't have a ton of durability, and the trees that we do add that have leaves are probably going to need to have a lot of leaves to justify the effort. And really, that's only going to make them that much more impactful when you do find them. You're going to feel even more satisfied that you finally found trees that have leaves because they have quite a lot of them, which should cover your sapling needs for a good while. If you're enjoying the video, please remember to like and subscribe. I make lots of content related to data packs, including worldgen like this, custom structures, and other data pack challenges, so I hope that you'll enjoy. And if you'd like to take the challenge and play in the Frost Pale dimension, please consider checking out my Patreon. I plan to release this data pack publicly once I feel it's ready, but for now it'll be early access for my wizard tier patrons and higher. Before I talk about the trees that I've added here, I also added this new feature that when you enter a new biome for the first time, brings up this nice little title for what the biome is and a cute little subtitle about it. So these are the Chilling Woods. And I've also named the biome that currently takes up most of the Frost Pale, which is the Snowfield. But now that we have that out of the way, let's talk about the Chilling Woods. So obviously, most of these trees are large spruce trees, though some of them are a little bit closer to jungle trees. However, I'm actually using the dark oak leaf placer. And then we also have the more traditional dark oak shaped pale oak trees, though those are less common and obviously much shorter, so they don't stand out quite as much as these huge mega trees. I really like using the mega tree trunk placers because they really add a sense of scale and wonder to trees and make them stand out more as an important feature and part of the landscape. All of these are of course pale oak, so they're using pale oak logs and pale oak leaves, and they have hanging moss as well as are transforming the ground underneath them into moss. Chilling Woods also have these small little boulders of stone and cobblestone, very similar to the mossy cobblestone boulders that you might find in an old growth taiga, and they have a lot more sweet berries too. In addition though, they also have more discs of snow and powdered snow, so you'll have to be just a little bit more careful as you're exploring here. Now in the rest of the Frost Pale, all of these sparse trees that don't have any leaves are completely safe, just made of pale oak for the aesthetic. Here in the Chilling Woods though, you'll have to be aware of the potential to encounter creaking, as some of these trees will have creaking hearts. I think we can even hear some, unless that's a normal ambient noise. Obviously that's only a problem at night, and because these trees are so much taller, even the regular pale oak trees that are here are a little bit taller than those you might find in the vanilla pale garden biome, that actually reduces the range that the creaking are able to spread away from their respective trees. This particular Chilling Woods is pretty small. I'm going to fly around a little bit and see if I can find a bigger one. It took a little while. I had to cross quite a ways across this snowfield, but this Chilling Woods does appear to be quite a lot larger, which I think is great. We don't want them to be super huge. They should certainly not be, anywhere close to half of the world, because we want finding these locations to be sort of thrilling and particularly exciting because it opens up that opportunity for the renewable wood. Now before I move on, I do want to add a variant to the Chilling Woods because this is another opportunity to add some more blocks that currently aren't available in the Frost Pale that I want to make sure the players are still able to obtain. So now, occasionally, as you are exploring a chilling woods, you may find yourself crossing into an infected forest. In addition to the ground being mycelium instead of grass, all of the tall grass that happens to generate on things like moss and such will also be this kind of infected purple color. And of course, we also have the huge red and brown mushrooms here. Now, currently I have it so mushrooms are able to spawn here. I'm not super sure if I like that because mushrooms are such, frankly, an OP mob to have access to. In theory, the infected forest should be relatively rare enough that it's not a huge deal, and I did make mushrooms pretty uncommon as far as passive mob spawns go. So we'll see if that stays, or if we relegate them to maybe a structure that only spawns in the infected forest, so you have to locate that to be able to get access to them. But right now, they are a pretty efficient source of leather and of course food if you can find them. Now don't go thinking that the infected forest is safe like the mushroom fields in vanilla Minecraft. Hostile mobs are still able to spawn here, including the creaking that still populate these trees. Although you may occasionally find things like witches that are stuck in powdered snow. Now, we've been putting it off for a bit, but I think it's time that we revisit the underground portions of the Frost Pale. This is obviously where players are going to be spending a not insignificant chunk of time as they mine for resources, and of course it takes up, more than half the world. For one, obviously we need to get ores generating, and we need to figure out roughly how we want to do that. My thinking is up here in the sort of upper parts of the world, coal will be reasonably common, but appear in smaller quantities, more akin to the small bits of iron that you would find in vanilla Minecraft. Conversely, like we talked about, iron is going to appear much more commonly, and primarily by extension in much larger veins up here at the top of the world. Copper, of course, is probably still going to be the same approximate frequency as in vanilla because it does require so many in order to really make use of, but I think that we'll have it as a little bit smaller veins just because they do drop multiples. Gold, redstone, emerald, lapis, and diamond are of course still going to spawn primarily in the lower sections of the world where it becomes blue ice instead of packed ice. Now you'll notice we do still have the large iron and copper veins generating here, of course made of tuff as well as a combination of iron ore and raw iron. And I think I am going to keep these, partly because I think they are pretty important for getting large amounts of iron and copper, and also I think they just look really cool and stand out so much better in a more interesting way with all of the blue ice surroundings. Now, adding ores to the caves is very important for just general progression and stuff, but it's still going to leave the caves looking pretty barren, so I think we're also going to add large ore blobs of things like calcite and probably even like ice, just to add some more texture and help break up the stark blue that's all down here. Obviously, ice is still blue, but I'm hoping the transparency and just the different texture altogether, especially of course at the larger sizes that it's going to be at, will do the job nicely. Basically filling the same role that diorite, granite, and andesite filled down here, which I don't think would make sense. And lastly, since we have these super tall mountains now that are stretching way above sea level, I really want to encourage players to come here, and so I think at the higher levels, probably above about 100, 128 or so, we're going to have diamonds very rarely spawn. I'll probably make the diamond that spawns up here have a very high chance of getting skipped if it is exposed to air, so you will still need to mine up here, properly strip mine or something in order to get a large amount of diamonds, but I think that will be really exciting and encouraging for getting players up into these really high mountains. So let's get all of that implemented. I've also gone ahead and replaced all of the ore textures so that it looks like they are embedded in packed ice and blue ice for deep slate ores rather than stone and deep slate. This is a purely aesthetic change. They still sound like stone, break the same hardness, all of that, but it's going to mesh much better in the larger world of the Frost Pale. And this is something I feel like I can get away with since this really is meant to be sort of a light total conversion of the way Minecraft gets played. Just looking at this nice cliff, we already see that we're getting the ore placement that we want. We have a pretty solid supply of iron ore, several veins, several of them large, and then we do have coal appearing relatively frequently, but in small amounts. One cool thing I added is a sort of fossil-like system. I didn't use fossils exactly because I wanted to do something a little bit different, but this allows the player to get access to bone blocks. We have a large random patch of bone blocks that have a random chance to be coal ore, and an even smaller random chance to be a block of coal. Seeing still obviously lots and lots of iron, but we're still getting good amounts of copper as well, but again, these smaller veins. And I think the blobs of ice as well as calcite are helping to break up a little bit. Looks like we're not getting a ton up here, but that I think is just coincidence. Now I could try looking around a little bit for diamond, but I think it's unlikely we're going to find any. I gave them about a 70% chance of failing to generate if they are connected to air. Okay, here's a little bit. Nice. So again, these are pretty uncommon when they're exposed to air. You'll typically have to strip mine for them, but that was about 4 diamond ore blocks. So they are going to be in pretty large veins when you do find them. You'll just have to do a little bit more searching, and again, particularly high up. We're at about Y119, which I think is pretty fair. Oh, here's a little bit more over here as well. I'm also using the resource pack to change the names of these blocks, so diamond ore has become frozen diamond ore, and all the deep slate ores are now blue frozen, in this case coal ore. Speaking of deep slate, let's head down to the blue ice level, and as we're going down we can see these huge blobs of ice that are covering the area. Because they're transparent but still solid, we get these dark blobs while we're in spectator mode, which wouldn't normally be visible. Doesn't really mean anything, I just think it's interesting to look at as we go down. We're seeing lots of calcite blobs as well still, so that's good. And then as we get down to the blue ice layer, then we're seeing a lot more gold, as iron gets a little bit less common, or at least less populous. And then we get down to closer to the bottom of the world where we're getting a lot of redstone, pretty good amount of gold. And unlike in the vanilla overworld, I have made blue frozen coal ore spawn closer to the bottom of the world. So you can find coal while you're deep underground. Now, of course, when you get to the very bottom of the world is when the lava flooding begins. This is hard-coded to be specifically related to the sea level. So because we haven't changed the sea level and we haven't made the world any more or less deep, we are getting lava flooding at about Y-55. Now, there isn't really a straightforward way to remove this, but we do have some options. I don't know whether Apollo invented the concept or if she just popularized it, but either way, thanks to her efforts, we know of a method that does allow us to reliably remove lava from the bottom of the world, and indeed reliably replace large chunks of blocks that aren't otherwise replaceable. Basically, what I'm going to try to do is create a feature that is a geode, but it's going to be at the maximum size, and it's just going to be able to replace only lava, or specifically be unable to replace anything except for lava. And I'm thinking we're going to replace it with water. So every single layer of the geode is going to be water, but it's not going to be able to replace air or blue ice or ores. It'll only be able to turn lava into water. And we'll just make that feature appear in every single chunk, in every single biome, and always at the same Y level, at the bottom of the world. And that should consistently replace the lava with water. The reason I want to do this is, I think, pretty obvious. The lava doesn't look very good here in the underground surrounded by ice. And I also think that making lava less accessible is going to add an interesting gameplay challenge and playstyle to the Frostpale. The lava lakes and lava springs are features that are on a per biome basis, and I have intentionally excluded them from all of my custom biomes. And I've also already made it so all the aquifers have a completely zero chance of being lava. They are only water. So let's see if we can get this geode feature working. I'll be honest, I wasn't expecting that to work quite so perfectly the first time. I figured I was going to have, small strands of lava that I would have to deal with, but it looks like that actually worked excellent. Instead of lava at the bottom of the world, we have water. This actually creates a really interesting effect because normally you wouldn't be able to see where the caves start to expose the bedrock since lava would be in the way, but now you actually do get to see that, so an interesting indicator that you are approaching the bottom of the world. I think in really large noise caves especially, this is going to create a really cool and interesting effect, almost like a true underground sea, which feels really appropriate for a frozen world. Now, of course, lava is still a very important resource. You obviously need it in some capacity in order to get access to the Nether, and we don't want to completely block that off. So while I do think I'll add lava to some structures later on, we're also going to make it so that you can smelt buckets into buckets of lava. I've made it so it takes a very long time, and it should be, I believe, 2 full coal in order to do it. But that way, if you're really in a pinch, you can get buckets of lava, and once you find something like dripstone, then that becomes even more accessible. Now currently dripstone doesn't generate, so let's start planning how we're going to get that incorporated into the world. I'm thinking the next biome we'll work on is the mountain biome that's going to cover most mountains. And I think it'd be really cool, since we're retexturing things like ores and stuff anyway, if we replace dripstone with icicles. Again, just like the ores, it's still going to have the same behavior, so it'll still be able to turn into a lava farm when combined with a cauldron, but I think it's going to fit a lot of the aesthetics better. The browns of dripstone just doesn't work very well with all the whites and blues that are covering the frost pale. And so I think it'd be really neat if dripstone, which will turn into icicles, hung from the ceilings of mountains, where it just gets really, really cold, but where necessarily lots of snow would understandably be falling and melting to some extent, turning into groundwater and freezing into icicles hanging from the ceiling. I'm also thinking of another biome that I think might be particularly rare, but probably spawning typically in sort of lowlands areas, but not quite at the rivers. And I'm thinking that's going to be primarily made of something like granite, just to add a little bit of color variety. I'm thinking this will be a hot spring biome, so it'll be mostly granite since it's a nice warm colored block. We'll have lots of puddles, probably filled with something like mud, as well as water, obviously. And then maybe this is where we'll have moss blocks as well, so we can get some lush blocks into this world. So let's put a few of these ideas onto paper. So this biome up here is the Hail Mountain, which I think is going to look exceptionally good on more jagged mountains as compared to this, which is a little bit more slopey and obviously has chilling woods flanking on either side. But unlike most of the rest of the frost pale, it doesn't have grass or dirt as the top layer, it's just snow and more frequent powder snow disks. As you can see, and as you probably have seen through most of the frost pale, I've made most of the illagers spawn more frequently in most of these biomes, which obviously stands out most during the day since they spawn in higher light levels than things like zombies and skeletons. So the Hail Mountain has mostly pillagers compared to witches or vindicators that you might find more commonly elsewhere. Those look so nice, especially hanging from this ice. These are being handled with a type of feature called a vegetation patch, which is probably one of the most overpowered features that we have in worldgen. Vegetation patches, geodes, and trees are some of my favorite features, and so we'll be using them a lot. Obviously, trees are useful to make trees, but there's a lot of other cool things you can do with them. I don't know if we'll be using a lot of those extra features here for this project. Maybe I'll make a separate video on that in the future if that's something you're interested in. But vegetation patches are what the lush caves use, and they're, again, it's just extremely powerful. They allow you to set the base block that they are going to be made of, that they're going to create a layer of, and they can do ceilings or floors. So in this case, we're doing ceilings of ice blocks. And then they let you set a chance to generate another feature. In this case, we're just doing some columns of pointed dripstone that have been renamed to icicles, with about a 30 or 40% chance of generating. And this creates just an absolutely perfect effect. If we can find some Hail Mountains that have some more open-mouthed caves on cliffs, then I think it will look even better, but of course we have to get lucky sort of finding those. Let's fly around for a bit and see if we can find a hot spring. They're not all going to be this small. There's a much larger one behind me that I'm ignoring because it doesn't look as nice, but I think that this is really representative of what they should normally end up looking like. We have these beautiful puddles that are filled with some lush blocks as well as seagrass and sea pickles, so this is going to be probably one of the main places that you get that. A good amount of mud that's helping break up the red and green of the granite and moss blocks. And I've also made it so that sniffer eggs can spawn naturally here, along with torch flowers. Sniffers are, of course, in vanilla Minecraft an extinct mob, as well as torch flowers being an extinct plant, but since I don't need to adhere to the vanilla overworld's lore necessarily, this is a completely separate dimension, a completely separate game practically, I can put them wherever I want, and I think it's cool that there are sniffer eggs in this biome. I decided not to make sniffers spawn here naturally and instead just rely on these sniffer eggs, which should hatch over time. Because in vanilla Minecraft sniffers don't spawn naturally, Mojang didn't actually give them any natural spawning rules, so they spawn in kind of weird places. They can spawn in water, they spawn in light or darkness, I believe. It's kind of just really odd, and I didn't want that. So I think I like the idea of there being sniffer eggs here, partly because as a block, they look really cool and fit the, aesthetic of the hot spring really well. It almost feels like they belong here just aesthetically, but also it just makes them spawn a little bit more naturally or organically too. Now all this moss is done with vegetation patches, again very similar to how vanilla Minecraft does it for the lush caves, and these calcite and magma blocks are also vegetation patches because they happen to fit the shape well, even though they don't have any actual vegetation on top of them. So very happy with how these turned out. Now as I'm flying around, I'm becoming less and less impressed by the frozen river biome that we've been sticking with. This is just, again, the vanilla Minecraft frozen river. And that obviously has an effect not only underground where we don't have any of the ores spawning because they're using the vanilla ore features, but also it just doesn't look as nice with the rest of the frost pale. Yes, it's ice, but it's not interesting. I think there's a lot that we can do here, and I have some great ideas. So of course, underneath the ice, we have water, which makes sense for a frozen river. But I want to go one step further. I'm thinking we use a geode feature just like we did at the bottom of the world to replace lava with water, to replace water up here with ice. That'll make this entire river made of ice, a true frozen river. But it won't really be behaving like a river anymore. I think it'd be even cooler to call it more of a glacier. And to add to that effect, I think I'll make the entire top section above this ice as well. So the ice actually will reach above sea level, almost like it's truly a glacier pushing through the terrain, carving out a path through the ground. Probably also good to add beaches at the same time, probably mostly going to be gravel. I don't think sand is going to work very well aesthetically here. I don't hate this ice on the beaches here, I just don't want it to be all of it. So I think we'll make a separate biome that's an ice beach, and then most of the beaches will be gravel. And we'll make sure these gravel and ice beaches still have the stone and packed ice piles that we have all throughout the snowfield. Yeah, I think that's a good plan. Let's get that implemented. I don't know about you, but to me this looks surprisingly good. This is the Glacial Runoff biome. So just as planned, we have these nice tall walls of solid ice that are sitting on top of the layer of ice that makes up the actual river. And these are once again made with vegetation patches, just further demonstrating how powerful that feature is. Basically all it is a vegetation patch that covers the ice, replaces it with ice, so really nothing happens, and then has a 100% chance of placing another feature, which is a column of ice blocks that can be either 4 or 5 blocks tall. And the reason I've done this is to just further separate the glacial runoff from a frozen river that's just taller for some reason. So it creates this very crazy kind of greeble effect on top, which for one just looks more exciting texture-wise, and for two actually serves an additional purpose of making it a little harder to travel on top of it via boat. I didn't do this necessarily to cause that. I don't specifically want to discourage boat travel, but I do think that creates just an additional sort of hazard or challenge to exploring the frost pale, so you have to potentially plan out a path or just plan on hopping across these glacial runoffs as you come across them. Now over here, closer to the oceans, is where we're actually going to see those beaches. In this case, we have a gravelly beach, which I think fits the shoreline just so much better than the packed ice that we were seeing earlier, as well as just the dirt that we would otherwise see or that covers the beaches of rivers. Now, if we fly out across this little ocean here, we are going to see where a glacial runoff, otherwise known as a river, does come and meet the ocean. And where this happens, we get a pretty harsh block of ice that has pretty flat walls where the biome basically ends. And while it does look a little bit off-putting, I don't know that I actually dislike it. We can see a little bit more over here and over here as well, and I think it works really, really well actually. Ultimately, the effect that it creates is unnatural, but in a very intentional kind of way that I'm pretty happy with. If we follow this nice and skinny river where the sea level does not dip very far below the terrain, then we end up in the new biome that I've added, which is the Dry Riverbed. So here you can see where the river, the water, has been turned into ice by the geode feature, but then it abruptly cuts off and this part of the river is completely without water or ice, at least regular ice. And I think this makes sense because we are still going to have sections of terrain that are lower where the sea level ought to be, where rivers ought to be filling, but would be otherwise cut off by the glacier, by the ice. And so there wouldn't be anywhere for the water to be coming from, so it would be empty. This is also where I'm making clay extremely plentiful. The entire top layer here, the entire surface rule of the dry riverbed is clay, and then we just have discs of gravel and dirt, as well as the typical packed ice and stone rocks that we would otherwise see. Now, if we follow this a little bit further and we see this dry riverbed, follow it along, there's a hot spring on one side, some Hale Mountains up there, which looks really nice, and then we've got some chilling woods on the other, but eventually we're going to end up hitting where the ocean is over here, and the dry riverbed doesn't quite work so well over here. Now, it's particularly harsh because this isn't a very large ocean. It's only just barely big enough to count as an ocean, and so it's getting these weird kind of cuts that otherwise would look pretty okay. See, like right here, I don't mind this so much. It's this that obviously looks kind of weird. So we might need to mess with the exact biome placements of the dry riverbed to prevent this from happening, or at least minimize it. But if we come over here, we can see some ice beaches, and although the difference is subtle, I do think it looks quite a lot better than the accidental ice beaches that we were having before. It's just a topsoil of packed ice, it's just the normal terrain, but we're getting the calcite blobs and ice blobs that we would expect, and we even get some of the ores that we would normally have to mine in some mountains for. So I'm glad we were able to find a place where the player can get access to lots of clay, but realistically, that's probably not enough to incentivize and prioritize using bricks as an uncommon block palette, which of course, as a reminder, is one of my goals with this project. So an additional recipe that I'm changing is the brick smelting recipe. So when you try and smelt your clay balls, you're going to find that they smelt way faster, about twice as fast, which also means that they require half as much fuel to smelt the same number of bricks. And to even further incentivize using bricks, I'm also going to make it so that when you do have 4 or 8 bricks in this case, and you craft them up into brick blocks, then you do get 4 brick blocks. In vanilla Minecraft, it makes a certain amount of sense that 4 bricks makes a single brick block because 4 clay balls makes a single clay block. But because a specific goal of this project is to prioritize uncommon block palettes that aren't typically used in survival Minecraft, like bricks, I want to be able to properly incentivize using them when otherwise other blocks might be more available. And so making bricks more available helps to do that. Now, speaking of uncommon block palettes, although we are using granite in the Hot Springs biome, currently diorite and andesite are not being used in the natural frost pale in the overworld here. And I'm frankly not really sure what I'd be using them for. Color-wise, they don't offer a lot of variety to the frost pale that I really need filled. So I think I'm going to completely replace these 2 blocks with something totally different, something that isn't natural, but that again can help facilitate those uncommon block palettes by expanding the block palette of a different natural block that you can craft into these. And I think the best way to give that a whirl is to add our first new structure to the frost pale. I'm probably going to add more buildings and in particular more roads in future episodes, but right now I wanted to get the basic structure for this village completed. I'm going to be making this relatively similar to the way vanilla villages behave, although I'm not trying to replicate them exactly. Right now I just have the one start, the one town center that the village is going to use, which is this nice pale oak tree that doesn't have a creaking heart or anything like that, just something a little bit more decorated. Again, I'll probably make a few more versions of this over time, but right now we just need the one. We also have a couple types of roads, 2 straight roads, one of them short, one of them long, and then we have 2 variants of this sort of curved road that have the entrances where the roads connect to one another at slightly different locations. And then these are all of the buildings that we have right now, the things that will populate outside of the roads that'll be generated by these rows of jigsaw blocks, as well as potentially here in the middle. The purpose of these rows of jigsaw blocks that are all facing the same way is to just kind of add a little bit of randomness and variety to where the houses, where the villager buildings are connected to the roads. They're not always connected at the exact same spot. Because of the way jigsaw structures work, if one of these jigsaws generates one of these larger structures, the bounding box for that structure is instantly going to block any of these other jigsaw blocks from being able to generate anything in that spot. We have 3 variants of small houses, and I've gone with 3 different types of architecture here, all trying to make use of the new blocks that I've implemented. You can tell them here by the roads as well. Basically, what we've done is replaced diorite with packed ice bricks and andesite with blue ice bricks. These 2 blocks, again, don't generate in the world naturally with the Frostpale data pack, so you will have to craft them by stone cutting ice or blue ice respectively. And then the polished diorite has been turned into packed ice tiles, and the polished blue ice has been turned into blue ice tiles, both with very different textures from one another, as well as from some of the other types of stone brick and tile blocks that you would otherwise see in vanilla Minecraft. And what's really cool is this basically automatically creates all of these stairs and slabs and wall blocks that these blocks are associated with too, without having to do really any extra work. So this small house is pretty empty. It's got a very nice facade where we have a packed and blue ice sort of lower layer that then has stairs going up into a pale oak upper bedroom section that has a workbench and a bed and a flower pot with a flower, one of the only places currently where we can find flowers like this. This house here is much brighter and features packed ice and blue ice on both levels, but again still has a staircase from the lower level, which has a bedroom, up to the upper level, which just has a nice storage where you'll be able to find some village loot. And then this final house has a bit of an extra roof or a fake roof up here, because if we go inside, this one is only a single floor. It doesn't have a second floor, but it does have a very nice chimney where a campfire can be found. These jigsaw blocks in the floor will spawn the villagers, which right now are just off to the side. It just makes it easier to keep track of them without having to spawn a whole bunch of them everywhere, and in particular helps make sure that they are the tundra villagers. I've got the iron golem here as well, and that's going to have a chance to spawn here at the town center. I also have jigsaws for cows, pigs, and sheep because the village is where these mobs are going to spawn, the only place that these mobs are going to spawn, at least right now. Pigs spawn here in this pig pen, which looks very nice and has this mud and otherwise is surrounded by a fence of pale oak. Cows will always spawn in the pen back here behind this butcher building, and sheep will spawn in the pen over here to the side of the shepherd building. We also have a farm here that I'm going to use a processor for to replace some of these crops, which are currently all just beetroots, so that some of them are potatoes and sweetberry bushes and things, just to add again some randomness and variety to the farm plot here. I think this watchtower turned out pretty nice, and it has a trapdoor up here at the top that allows you to get up to the roof or down from the roof into the sort of toolsmith area, where we once again have a chest filled with some loot. We also have a blacksmith or smelter building over here that has both a furnace and a blast furnace. And up on the second floor, it has a chest with pretty traditional blacksmith loot. So now that we have the at least beginnings of a village, let's get this generating. Certainly it's going to generate primarily in the snowfield, but I also think it could be pretty cool if it had a chance to generate in the dry riverbed as well, since over time, places like that would become relatively safe places to establish a civilization. Even when doing custom world gen, it's pretty hard to escape from the funny quirks of Minecraft structure generation. This village started down here in the snowfield on that hill there, but obviously being right next to a mountain, the roads end up colliding with that and climbing way up here to these poor little hermit houses. But other than some funny cliffs, I think the generation turned out pretty good. We're getting a pretty nice variety of houses, mostly these small ones, but we're getting a good mixture of the 3 different architecture types, good collection of farms spread around everywhere, and even some of the larger buildings like the watchtower and the furnace house. Oh, it looks like some pillagers have found their way into the village and are attacking the villagers. This isn't a raid, dude. Get out of here. Now, the reason that I've added both a blast furnace and a furnace to this blacksmith structure is going to be a little bit contentious, I think. I've decided that instead of being able to craft a furnace with 8 cobblestone, it's actually going to now require 8 stone to be able to get your first furnace. And you'll immediately realize the paradox there. If you need a furnace to get stone, how are you supposed to get stone to craft a furnace? And that's exactly what the village is meant to answer. The player will have to find their first furnace by finding a village so that they can get access to stone to be able to craft another furnace. And the same is going to be true for stone swords, pickaxes, shovels, axes, and hoes. You will need stone to craft all of these tools and weapons rather than cobblestone. This is in pursuit of that goal that I mentioned at the beginning. We want to extend the early and mid game and again, make those milestones feel more impactful. Although we've made stone less plentiful by turning the terrain into packed ice and blue ice instead, there is still plenty of stone around if you go looking for it. We've made it relatively common up here on the surface, there's just a lot less of it comparatively. And so there's nothing to stop the player from doing the old faithful task of crafting a wooden pickaxe to mine 3 stone, and then craft a stone pickaxe to get the rest of their stone for stone tools. This way, the player's entire first tool set might be wooden for a good amount of time until they are able to really set down some roots and move on to that mid-early game with more stone tools. And because their stone tools now require fuel and therefore time in order to acquire, the hope is that the player will have more reverence and respect for these tools, making that milestone feel more significant. A similar issue has arisen thanks to making iron more common, because I felt it was important to be able to make renewable wood more accessible by making shears a little bit easier to acquire. Again, once you have a furnace, access to a furnace or blast furnace, it means that iron tools are now too easy to get, especially right after you get your first stone tools. And so once again, we need to push iron tools specifically behind yet another barrier, make that milestone more important and satisfying to reach. And the way that I'm going to do this is by replacing iron tools with steel tools, steel pickaxe, steel axe, as well as steel armor instead of iron armor. You will now have to craft your iron ingots and copper ingots into steel ingots, and then craft those into the respective tools and armor. I can't stress enough that none of these changes are to make the game specifically grindier or harder. Challenge is certainly an important aspect of the Frostpale, but more than that, it's about providing a different play style for the player in survival and extending, again, that early and mid-game. Now, if furnaces are less common, that means that players are going to have to rely on campfires in particular much more in the early game in order to cook their food. So I've made the campfire recipe less expensive as well. It no longer requires coal or charcoal to craft, it's just going to be 4 logs and 4 sticks. But again, continuing in that theme of trying to make the game more challenging and offer a different play style for survival, once you do cook up your food, whether it's in a campfire, a furnace, or even crafting together 3 wheat into bread, the food that you do get is not going to be stackable anymore. Raw food is still stackable, but cooked food and any other kind of efficient food source is only going to have a max stack size of 1. This is pretty similar to how food worked way back in alpha and beta, and though I do think the change to stackable food was good and important for vanilla Minecraft, in the name of additional challenge and new playstyles here in the Frostpale, I think reverting it, at least for cooked food and other efficient food sources like golden apples, just adds a different kind of experience to being prepared to survive. Because now the player might be encouraged to carry a bunch of raw food on them as well as a campfire when they go out exploring, set down their campfire, and then cook up the food that they need as they need it once they reach their destination. I realize this is a pretty big change, but I think it's a really cool one and one that I hope you will give a chance if you decide to play. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the Frostpale as it currently stands and see how it plays from a survival perspective. And I thought it'd be cool if right away when the player opens up their game, they apply the resource pack, they're ready to play the Frostpale, and this is what they see. I just think this perfectly captures what is in store for the player once they get started. So let's go ahead and get a world opened up. So right away when the player opens the world for the first time, they're of course going to get that biome title for the biome they happen to have spawned in. And then I've also added this message that asks if you'd like to enable tutorial mode. This is based on the tutorial mode that I added to my New in Town data pack, which I found really improved player comprehension of what is expected of them gameplay-wise and how to progress when there is custom progress to be made. So let's go ahead and enable that and see what it wants us to do first. So of course we can disable the tutorial mode at any time, it's very important, but it recommends we gather some wood first. So we got a tree over here, want to keep an eye out for any powdered snow. Let's go ahead and mine one of these. So this first tutorial tip lets the player know that saplings will not drop from leaves. You'll have to craft them with 4 leaves of the same type. And of course right now we don't have any leaves and no shears. We also got this advancement called the Frostpale, and we can take a look at our advancements menu to see what that entails. Right now we don't have any other advancement tabs, but I haven't removed any of the normal Minecraft advancements. So once we start making normal progress, those will also pop up here still. But we can see a couple of goals for us. We could visit every frost pale biome. Currently there are 11 of them. Find a frost village. Of course, that's a pretty big one, but we can also craft a wooden tool for that old reliable advancement. Let's go ahead and do that. Okay, and let's try crafting our first wooden pickaxe and get that old reliable advancement. So like I mentioned before, the first thing that a player is likely to do once they craft a wooden pickaxe is go straight for some stone so they can craft some stone tools. Let's give that a try and see what happens. And it's immediately going to let us know about those stone changes. Cobblestone is still useful, but we have to smelt it into stone for stone tools or a furnace. And it lets us know that we can find some by exploring the frost pale. My advancement menu is also letting me know that in the meantime, until I can get a furnace, such as by going to a village, then I can craft a campfire with just some logs and sticks. And if we look at our recipe book, we can see that that is the case here as well. We can use that to see, oh, we don't need coal anymore. Let's go ahead and grab all of the logs that we need. And we're probably going to get hungry pretty soon, so I'll grab some sweet berries while they happen to be here. Okay, so I'll need a few extra sticks, but now I can go ahead and craft a campfire. And doing that lets us know that we can bake logs into charcoal using a campfire, since coal is pretty unplentiful up here in the upper sections of the world. That way we get access to torches, even though we don't need the coal for fuel right now, since campfires don't require any. I'll go ahead and make myself some more tools here so that we can survive out in the frost pale. And let's go out and see if we can find a village. There's plenty of iron and copper in this exposed cave here, but we can't mine it yet because we don't have a stone pickaxe. I do see a little coal though, so let's grab that. And I'll also get a little bit of packed ice as a building block, since, as the tutorial tip says, we can mine it with any pickaxe without silk touch. A new player probably isn't likely to attack any wolves right away, but right now we don't have access to any bones, so we can't tame them. They're just kind of here. I do see, I think, a goat off in the distance. And I don't think it's unreasonable as the sun begins to set for players to start wondering, oh, where am I supposed to get wool? So let's try and kill this goat. Unfortunately, didn't get any wool, but we did get some mutton, which lets us know that we can cook it in a campfire if we don't already have one, but that it won't stack once we do cook it. Here's another goat. Still no wool yet, unfortunate. Oh, but here's a village, fantastic. Villages in the Frost Pale are a little less common than those in the Overworld, but they do still show up pretty regularly. Now I'm making just a beeline for a village, but my hope is that players will start to settle down somewhere pretty early and use wooden tools for a while before they actually go out and hunt down a furnace. Of course, we also still need to be lucky if there is a furnace here in this village. Aha, I think that is one of the furnace houses. So first off, let's go to sleep, and then we can get access to our first furnace. And this also opens up quite a bit more of our advancement tree, so we can really get an idea of what the expectation is from here. We can of course craft some stone tools, and of course we are going to want some iron pretty soon, and once we do, that'll help us get some saplings. We learn now that we can smelt a bucket into a lava bucket, and the player can now learn that steel ingots exist, although it may not be clear exactly what they're for yet. Let's see what kind of blacksmith loot we get up here. And I've added steel ingots in here as well, so you aren't completely on your own. We've also got some iron ingots, which is great. And this also brings up the tutorial tip that we need to turn them into steel ingots to craft tools and armor. Now we have a good amount of sweet berries, but again, they aren't very efficient, so let's go ahead and cook up our mutton here. And while we're waiting, we can mine up some stone so that we can get our stone tools. Here's our mutton, and that's starting to take up quite a bit of inventory space, so maybe we shouldn't have done that right away. Let's smelt up our cobblestone here. I only have the one coal right now, so if we can find a log, I might as well just take one from here since this is just for demonstration. We can bake that up on the campfire here. And now we can put that in our furnace to be able to smelt the rest of this stack of cobblestone. And I hope that gives you a pretty good idea of how I'm expecting the Frost Pale to play. Of course, at this point, once the player does have stone tools, I would expect they probably are going to start working on their house or decide to stay in the village where all the resources are pretty plentiful. It looks like I see a shepherd's house back there. We've got at least one farm plot. And of course, off behind us, we have some chilling wood. So once we are ready to start getting renewable wood, we could get some shears and go over there to get those leaves. In future videos, I plan to add even more structures to the Frost Pale and probably a few more biomes as well. I think especially the underground could use a few cave biomes to spice things up, and I have some great ideas for other structures that can bring some life to the Frost Pale while still presenting a fun and interesting survival challenge. The current version of the Frost Pale is available in early access for my Wizard tier patrons and higher, so I hope you'll check out my Patreon to get that early access and see what all the hype is about. And as a reminder, I do plan to release this data pack publicly once I feel like I've added enough to fully encompass all the challenges and goals that I have set for myself. There's still quite a lot of natural blocks that aren't currently obtainable, and right now there isn't a very clear goal. However, I have made certain vanilla structures like mine shafts and trial chambers spawn in the Frost Pale, so there's still plenty to do, and the Stronghold even generates as well, so you can still beat the game while playing the Frost Pale challenge. If you've enjoyed the video, please remember to like and subscribe, and I hope you'll keep an eye out for new Frost Pale videos, as well as other data pack videos related to world gen, structures, and more. Thanks for watching!